Welcome back to your end-of-year final exam Jeopardy podcast answer review. Let's go ahead and get started with Unit 7, World War II. Number 1, which statement about the pre-World War II Europe is not true? The answer is D. Hitler made plans to gain Lebensraum in Western Europe. Although it's true that he did want to gain Lebensraum, which is another way of saying living space, although he did want to gain this Lebensraum in Europe, it was not in Western Europe. It's in Eastern Europe. If you remember, Hitler had this idea that the people in the East, which were mostly Slavic, he felt that they were inferior. He felt that they did not deserve to have all this territory in Eastern Europe that they had gained. And so his goal was to, immediately after establishing himself in power and having gained some territory to the Third Reich, his goal was to turn to the East and to go ahead and gain this Lebensraum, not in Western, but in Eastern Europe. And so D is the lie. Number 2, which statement about the Non-Aggression Pact is not true? The lie is C. Officially placed the Soviet Union on the Axis Powers Alliance. If we remember, the two alliances of World War II were the Allied powers and Axis powers. And although the Soviet Union will sign a non-aggression pact with Hitler, this non-aggression pact does not place the USSR on the Axis Powers Alliance. It simply states that Germany and the Soviet Union are in agreement to kind of stay out of each other's way, and if they do come into contact, to be kind of like friendly towards each other, but not that they are our official allies. This non-aggression pact does not state that the Soviet Union will protect Germany or that Germany will protect the Soviet Union. And so since that idea of I have your back, you have my back, since that is not part of the non-aggression pact, then these two countries were never allies, meaning the Soviet Union was never on the Axis Power Alliance. Now, eventually, as the war continues, we will eventually see the Soviet Union join an alliance, and that will be the Allied Powers Alliance after Operation Barbarossa. Question 3, which statement about Blitzkrieg is not true? The answer is A, allowed for the complete destruction of France in less than 2 days. Although Blitzkrieg was extremely successful for Germany, the Germans were able to come in and completely wipe out large chunks of Europe with these back-to-back three-wave attacks, the French, upon seeing the success of Blitzkrieg, feared that their country would be utterly destroyed by Germany. And so before Hitler could even enter into France, the French had automatically already gone into negotiation mode. They were trying to negotiate everything possible to avoid Blitzkrieg being used on their country. One agreement within this negotiation period was that Hitler would receive a large chunk, almost more than half of France would be willingly given over to him, and then the other portion, about little less than a third of the country, would remain quote-unquote free, supposedly. However, if we remember back to those notes from Unit 7, we know that this free France was not really free, because ultimately the individuals that had power to control all of the decision-making in this free France was the Germans. Let's take a look at number 4. Which statement about the Pacific Theater is not true? The lie is A. Many people might cite the Pearl Harbor attack as proof that World War II started before the 1939 invasion of Poland. Now, although we did discuss the fact that a lot of people have different ideas on when exactly World War II started, some will cite the early 1930s saying, hey, it started with Japan invading China. Some people will cite it in 1939 with the invasion of Poland. So there's all these different ideas of when World War II started. A is a lie, because if we take a look at the first event, Pearl Harbor, if we remember, Pearl Harbor took place after Poland was invaded. Pearl Harbor was in 1941. So the idea that many people might cite the 1941 attack of Pearl Harbor as proof that World War II started before the 1939 invasion of Poland, if you do the math, 1941 Pearl Harbor was after the 1939 invasion of Poland. And so A is false because Pearl Harbor was not before Poland, Pearl Harbor was after. So for this one, we gotta kind of remember where Pearl Harbor was, December 7th, 1941. So A is the lie. Number 5, which statement about the ending of World War II in the European theater is not true? The lie is A. The Manhattan Project led to the unconditional surrender of the Axis powers in the European theater. If we remember, the Manhattan Project was the code name given to America's secret plans and secret scientific experiments with nuclear weaponry, meaning the atomic bomb. Now, we know that the atomic bomb is dropped on Japan, and the battles with Japan and all of the fighting with Japan was taking place in the Pacific theater, not the European theater. And so this is the lie, because it did not lead to the unconditional surrender of the Axis powers in Europe. It led to the unconditional surrender of the Axis powers in the Pacific theater. Let's take a look at number 6. Which statement about the post-World War II era is not true? The answer is A. Saw France, Great Britain, and the USSR take a lesser role in international politics and events. If we remember, post means after. And after World War II, we did see France kind of step down and play a smaller role. And we also saw Great Britain step down and play a smaller role. Both of these countries playing smaller roles because they had been devastated by World War II. They had pretty much wasted almost all their resources fighting Hitler. Even though, Great Britain and France never had blitzkrieg used against them, they did sustain a small portion of fighting. Great Britain had suffered tremendous amounts of bombing. The French had been under the occupation of the Germans when the Germans came in and basically took over more than half of French and then controlled the quote-unquote free part. And so these two countries had been heavily devastated by World War II, and after post-World War II, pretty much told the United States, we're going to kind of focus on ourselves. We're not going to really try to take any big role in the international political arena now that the Cold War is starting. But the USSR did not take a lesser role. They actually got really heavily involved. If we remember, post-World War II, boom, Cold War starts. And we know that the USSR was a huge player in the Cold War. So A is the lie, because the USSR did not take a lesser role. They were very much heavily involved in the post-World War II era. Let's take a look at number 7. This was a See Mean Matter political cartoon, kind of going over some key concepts for World War II. Let's see what you guys got. Please note that for the See Mean Matter, it's a 3-part question. If you got any part of this question wrong, then you got number 7 completely incorrect, okay? So if we take a look, here are some 3 key things that hopefully you jotted down. One thing we see is a woman, and we know that she must be an influential isolationist, meaning a very important person, government official or political leader or celebrity, somebody of power who is very much about isolationism, meaning let's focus on just us, America. Whatever happens over there on the other side of the world is not our problem. We then see some children, and, just kind of by looking at this political cartoon, the children are representing U.S. citizens who are unsure of whether the U.S. should get involved in World War II or whether the U.S. should kind of stick out of this. And so they're kind of sitting here listening to this influential isolationist who's trying to basically spread her or his isolationist ideas. The next thing we see is the storybook, which is the actual propaganda, the actual piece of paper that this influential isolationist is using to persuade the American public that it should be isolationist. So overall, the meaning of this political cartoon, influential people or organizations in the U.S. are working to convince the public that what is happening in Europe does not concern the U.S. And since it does not concern the U.S. should not get involved in World War II. Why is this important, or why is this message of matter? Many will argue that when it comes to the many lives lost during World War II, the U.S. was just as guilty as the Nazis were because the U.S. chose to act as a bystander. So this political cartoon really kind of ties back to our Unit 7 summative essay and what we saw in Schindler's List. This idea that some people would say, you know what, the Holocaust, World War II, all the scary things that this big bad wolf Adolf Hitler is doing in Europe, it's not really our problem. We should really just kind of focus on our country first. This isn't really affecting us anyways. And a lot of the people who kind of bought into this isolationist idea, at the end of the war, they're going to be seen as just as guilty as the Nazis. You may not have pulled the gas chamber level, you may not have kidnapped Jews and killed them, you may not have stripped them of their rights, but you knew this was happening and you chose to ignore it, so you are just as guilty. Okay, and again, this idea that these people are guilty bystanders, that again is a political opinion of the cartoonist who drew this. That's not necessarily the political opinion that you need to take, or that's not the political opinion shared in this class. We're just going over some political cartoons. All right, so let's take a look at number 8, the very, very last question, another seeming matter. So within this political cartoon, we see Adolf Hitler. We see airplanes in a crystal ball, and we know that these airplanes must signify an invasion or attack. And then we know up here it says, no, mein Führer, Führer meaning Hitler, that was the name he was given as leader. I don't see you making a journey across the water. So we see the prediction text here. This is a negative event for Hitler. We can kind of pick that up from the wording. So what does this mean? This means that Hitler will not be able to launch blitzkrieg against Great Britain, or that he won't be able to launch Operation Sea Lion. Blitzkrieg, remember, is that 3 back-to-back wave attack, and once he realizes he can't launch this back-to-back 3-wave attack because the tanks can't get over the English Channel, he then decides he will launch a naval water invasion known as Operation Sea Lion, which, if we remember, Operation Sea Lion, he never got to launch it because the Battle of Britain bombing pretty much ended in Germany's defeat. The British were able to get their planes up into the air, shoot down all the German planes, or get all the German planes out of the British sky. So with Great Britain winning the Battle of Britain, Operation Sea Lion never took place. Hitler never launched that massive naval water invasion. Why does this matter? Whether we're talking about blitzkrieg on Great Britain or Operation Sea Lion on Great Britain, since neither of these invasions took place, Hitler was never able to launch attacks on other continents aside from Africa. So since he was never able to conquer Great Britain, he kind of got stuck in Europe before he was going to move on to Asia or to South America or to North America. He wanted to have Europe in his pocket, and he did not have Europe in his pocket since Great Britain was the only European country pretty much left standing. We're also going to see that if these two invasions, the Blitzkrieg strategy or Operation Sea Lion, if either of these invasions had been successful, there would have no longer been an Allied powers alliance for the U.S. to join. Remember that when the United States joined the Allied powers, it pretty much joined an alliance in which Great Britain was barely holding on. And so if Great Britain had been overtaken through Blitzkrieg or Operation Sea Lion, there really wouldn't have been an Allied powers for the U.S. to join, and we might have even seen Hitler leave the European continent with it in his pocket and now transition over into Latin America, parts of North America, maybe even other parts of Asia. And so this political cartoon really shows that a lot of positive things for the Allied powers were a result of the fact of this invasion, Blitzkrieg or Sea Lion, never being successful. That concludes the Unit 7 review. Please go ahead and count up your number correct and give us a number correct over 8. Remember that if you have an answer incorrectly written down, whether that's the letter A through D or an explanation, please make sure that you correct that. If you have a score of 3 or below, you're within the D or F range and should really reconsider reviewing your Unit 7 notes. Anything a 4 or above, you're doing really well, and this shows that you've mastered the main key concepts for this unit. Go ahead and jump to the next section of the questions, Unit 8, final section, and we'll see you in just a moment.